Fan theories are something abound in Final Fantasy games, but none sees quite as many as Final Fantasy VIII. I'm going to go over one I still wholeheartedly believe in to this day. Yes, I am necessarily coloring Rinoa, Squall, and Cypher as our characters, so I have an excuse to say this. Rinoa and Ultimecia are the same person. That might be a little inflammatory to say, but it's got to be one of my favorite theories about this game, and there's a lot of them. See, one thing that a lot of players missed about Final Fantasy VIII were all the intricate details the story provided. These were entirely missable scenes that depended heavily on player choice. For instance, Instructor Aki. Instructor Aki is a character that most players never even encountered, but it's possible if Squall shows off his gunblade at the wrong time, or starts casting magic outside of battle. He doesn't have a problem with card games. He probably likes Triple Triad as much as the rest of the Final Fantasy fandom. But that's pretty easy considering it's hands down the best Final Fantasy minigame in the franchise. Eat it, Blitzballers! There are alternate scenes that happen between the games due to Ragnus Laguna, who, spoiler alert, is also Squall's father, all Darth Vader style. Long story short with this one, there's a scene outside the bar before Laguna and his crew meet the piano girl, Julia Hartley, Rinoa's mother. Laguna will either respond passively or aggressively depending on certain choices the player makes. Follow that up with a scene inside the bar. You have a chance at Laguna staying up all night to talk about himself, or falling asleep halfway through their date because he drank a little too much wine. There's a scene between Squall and Rinoa that takes place if you visit the infirmary after the attack on Garden, where Squall will actually lead Rinoa on and flirt with her, and then tell her, JK, not interested. Really, dude? Or how about an entire scenario where Laguna may or may not have his best friend Ward along for the journey? There's even a point where you can walk around Garden as one of the game's side characters and get an entirely different perspective. This is one of the only instances in the game where the player doesn't have control of Squall, the main character, outside of the alternative timeline. Oh, did I mention there's time travel in this game? I tried asking Onyx and Andrew a bunch of questions about how time travel works for the making of this project, but I think I passed out halfway through the explanation. I couldn't for the life of me wrap my head around how it works. But anyway, yeah, you can actually walk around Garden as Irvine Kinneas and get a glimpse at the budding side romance that makes its way into the plot all the way to the final act. But on to the main topic. Is Rinoa Ultimecia? I found a really well thought out article about this theory, and I'm going to be linking it in the description of this video. That being said, let's dive in. The Rinoa Ultimecia theory from Hardly.com. No one knows where the theory originated, but since the early days of the Final Fantasy VIII fandom, the idea of Ultimecia being a future corrupted version of Rinoa has been both staunchly supported and attacked by gamers. I hope you'll see it with intrigue and amusement. Nothing is really canon after the game ends anyway, so let's just have fun with it and allow fans to indulge in this harmless personal interpretation. That's probably my favorite part of fan theories, I'll be perfectly honest. So, this theory in a nutshell says, there will be an Ultimecia in the future. Her existence, persecution, and defeat are inevitable. You can't change the past, and Ultimecia's death in the past created the present and the future. That goes in line with what Onyx and Andrew were saying. Now, what if that Ultimecia was not a random person yet to be born, but one of the fighters who would perpetuate her own tragic destiny? The proponents of this theory are as follows. Longevity. The theory starts with Rinoa living for a few hundred years longer than her peers. Her extended life could be the result of being sealed by SR technology, such as with Sorceress Adele, or an anomaly caused by her inheritance of powers from 3 different witches. From there are a myriad of reasons why she changes. Some possibilities are amnesia and just plain insanity. The simplest and best one is that she grows jaded and bitter from whatever horrors humans unleashed upon her. By then, Squall and anyone else she ever loved would have died long ago. They could have even died just trying to protect her. But what motive? Whether she's corrupted, forgetful, or just crazy, she decides to compress time, just as she desired on Ragnarok generations ago to escape her fate. An alternative explanation is that she is only playing the part of being evil. She may remember everything, but realizes that her campaign needs to happen for her younger self to be happy, if only for a brief time. Whichever the reason, she knows all the complex details she needs to accomplish this goal. This is followed by a realization. As Ultimecia dies, falling right into the destiny that tortured her for most of her life, she tries to send a final message to her younger self. Treasure your youth in these precious times. There's only hell to come, and there's nothing you can do about it. So right now, in the present, appreciate it. Then she warps back to Ida's orphanage to start the vicious cycle again. For people who hate unhappy endings, some have even suggested a parallel universe for Rinoa Ultimecia, or multiple timelines created when you change history. This may be easier for some fans to swallow. Some points and reasonings behind this theory say that independently these observations aren't conclusive. Collectively, though, they're enough to stimulate creative fans and strongly give this theory the benefit of doubt. Number one is that the world hates witches, or sorceresses in this case. They've been traditionally despised, and Adele left a nasty impression. Many people haven't forgiven Ida, and Rinoa was urged to be sealed immediately upon awakening. Now people know Ultimecia is coming, but they don't know who she will be. Rinoa is now the only publicly known sorceress, and a powerful one. Her continued persecution is very likely. Number two is the Guardian Forces, a series of summons that exist in the Final Fantasy VIII world. And in this case, Griever is a big one. The writer of this article states that they find it hard to believe that Ultimecia would use a newly created GF in the biggest battle of her life. She would use her best and most compatible one. The name is something Squall and Rinoa knew. Additionally, both Tiamat, the corrupt Bahamut, and Omega Woman, based on Ultimate Weapon, are seen in her castle. There's also the aspect of Rinoa's foreshadowing. For instance, on Disc 3, on the Ragnarok, as Rinoa dreads her impending future as a new sorceress, she states, "I don't want the future. I want the present to stand still. I want to stay here with you." This is reminiscent of time compression. Furthermore, in Centra, Rinoa contemplates the idea of fighting everyone and being killed by Squall. And she says, "I guess it's okay if it's you, Squall, no one else." So what about Squall's visions? As Squall lies dying in the wasteland outside of time at the end of the game, he sees bizarre imagery. He sees Rinoa dying, he sees Rinoa's face juxtapositioned against Ultimecia's face, he sees the image of Rinoa's happiest times fading away into obscurity. He cries afterwards. It's possible that he's receiving information about the future, which his mind translates into symbolic imagery in a way that he can understand. I'll be honest, as someone who is outside of time magic, experiencing it is extremely hard to comprehend when you're going through it. But then there's also Sorceress Ida's foreshadowing. After passing on her sorceress powers and looking back on when she first saw Ultimecia at the orphanage, Ida tells Squall, "I now understand there is an end, no matter how painful it may be. Therefore, Squall, you must fight to the end, even though it may bring tragedy to others." She knows they must fight Ultimecia to complete the time paradox. But what tragedy is she referring to? Another one is the aesthetic style. All witches in Final Fantasy VIII are shown to have unique colorings and markings, except for Rinoa. Rinoa does have a sorceress form, but it hasn't manifested yet. But given their winged motifs and beautiful faces, Rinoa could reasonably look like Ultimecia. Additionally, both Rinoa's room, or mansion, and Ultimecia's castle have a similar Gothic Victorian style. Ultimecia herself does have some foreshadowing toward the end, or during the final battle. As she dies, Ultimecia tells the seeds, "Reflect on your childhood, your sensations, your words, your emotions. Time, it will not wait. No matter how hard you hold on, it escapes you. And I can't disappear yet." For someone who has spoken so violently to our enemies, these melancholy words are very out of character, if you take the story at face value alone. And this one is my favorite. It's the reason why I started using all of the Dissidia Opera Omnia backgrounds for these videos. In Dissidia, Ultimecia's exclusive weapons all share the same names as Rinoa's exclusive weapons. You have the Valkyrie, the Cardinal, the Shooting Star. These weapon names debuted with Rinoa. Most Dissidia villains had unique weapons, or weapons with a long history, such as Sephiroth having Masamune. No other villain had exclusive weapons from one opponent. It's like Square wants to confuse us. Also, in Dissidia Opera Omnia, Rinoa and Ultimecia both upgraded with the same crystal color, green. Now, these are just a few observations made by the person who wrote this article, and there are a lot more. For example, the fact that Rinoa states she wants to become a lion, and Ultimecia has lion feet. For anyone who wants to do any further reading on this subject, I will be putting the link to this theory in the description, and it has other links at the bottom for further game observations. The writer then notes some benefits of acceptance of this theory. First, it eliminates the Necron problem. What is Necron? Play Final Fantasy IX. But Final Fantasy has this nasty habit of tossing in random final villains with little or no connection to the storyline, up to that point. Not only is it anticlimactic, it leaves the player with no reason to fight, nor a feeling of success when they win. Under the Rinoa is Ultimecia theory, there is a definite connection between Ultimecia and your party, and she's no longer a bland evil boss. Now you understand why she's evil. Now there's a touch of sadness and tragedy to your final fight. Now her chilling last words mean so much more. There's also the thoughtful commentary on human nature. Prejudice, persecution, condemnation, and degeneration. These are things we are familiar with. Final Fantasy VII's storyline made itself relevant with its capitalism and industrial corruption that echoes our own society. Similar, Final Fantasy VIII's storyline made itself relevant with the genocide and retaliation that echoes our own horrific history. The personal decay of Rinoa's idealism is something that most people can understand on an individual level as well. The idea of being in love, yet feeling as if this is fated to end, hits closer to home than a happy ending. It's also consistent with themes and fills in a few plot holes. This theory is actually consistent with the game's themes of love and time and paradox. In regards to love, the story often tells you that you should value the love you have at present. An upsetting future actually increases the importance of cherishing your loved ones in the moment. In regards to the time paradox, there is the stunning conclusion where Ultimecia gives her powers to Ida in the past, starting this entire story. By having Rinoa be the one who kills her future self, it furthers the significance of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Additionally, this theory connects C's decision to have power by sacrificing memories via guardian forces. If accepted, it could also explain how Ultimecia knew so many details to carry out complex manipulations, and how Rinoa stayed alive in space with no life support systems. However, this theory isn't without its problems. The biggest problem with this theory, as noted by this author, is that it simply is unlikely to be canon for the Final Fantasy game. Square likes their Final Fantasy games to be positive, or at least idealistically ambiguous. They like happy endings. While they do often touch on mature, emotional elements such as death, war, and so on, the company wants the game series to emphasize wholesome values as the last note. Well, this is true, but there have been Final Fantasies that have ended in tragedy before. See Final Fantasy XV. However, this is an older theory for a much older game. But as a for instance of Square rewriting things for a more wholesome twist on a really tragic and gruesome tale, did you know that in the original story of Final Fantasy VII, it was written to include generations of reincarnated tragedy, a gruesome caste system, broken faith, cannibalism, and mass human exploitation? In an interview with Soryaga Saga, one of the writers for Xenogears discussed pitching the script to Final Fantasy VII, and they were told that it was too dark and complicated for a fantasy. This eventually got rewritten to be Xenogears. And it's something that happened to Final Fantasy creator Sakaguchi with his Wii RPG titled The Last Story. Nintendo slapped a no-good verdict on his original story, prompting the game veteran to reset development. This demonstrates that multiple game companies place a limitation on morose story material in fantasy games, and it overrides the intentions of the original creator. It's one reason, honestly, why we feel it's important for us to tell the story of Tales of Atonement. These themes, they're a commentary on things that we want to talk about, things that we want to discuss, things that we value and find important. It muddies things up to get too many people involved. But with such a depressing future for one of their main protagonists, it could cross the line of those standards. And thus, it's possible that the writers are insinuating such a connection to the game, or that it was originally in the story but later edited out. However, it's doubtful that Square Enix will ever release a confirmation on a dark interpretation of events. It can't be proven, but since Square never specifically denies it, we can still indulge in this theory. And this is why I needed to ask some questions about time travel to see if it's even possible. According to Andrew, there's no possible way a past and future self can meet unless those two selves are suspended from differing dimensions within a multiverse. The multiverse is a hypothetical set of all universes. Together, these universes are presumed to comprise everything that exists, the entirety of space, time, matter, energy, information, and the physical laws and constants that describe them. The different universes within the multiverse are called parallel universes, flat universes, other universes, alternate universes, multiple universes, plane universes, parent and child universes, many universes, or many worlds. One common assumption is that the multiverse is a patchwork quilt of separate universes, all bound by the same laws of physics. So a tapestry, instead of like a stream, timey-wimey something? As discussed in the theory, Ultimecia, the game's main villain, has the goal of compressing time into one moment that she can keep forever. Time compression. And the debate over whether or not a multiverse actually exists has been up for debate since at least the 6th century BCE, originally proposed by a pre-Socratic philosopher named Anaximander. I tried to get Andrew to tell me if he'd ever actually spoken to Anaximander personally, but he refused to comment on that. I'm going to be doing a little more looking into Anaximander because I'm almost certain I know exactly who he is. What I do know about him so far is that he was an early Greek philosopher in what would now be called Turkey, but was then called Ionia. He belonged to the Milesian school, where he was taught by Thales. Later in life, he became the master of that school and succeeded Thales, and was actually the man who taught Pythagoras and Anaximenes. I'm sure you've heard of Pythagoras before. The Pythagorean theorem, you know, the area of two squares on the legs of a right triangle are equal to the square on the hypotenuse. Did you also know he was the first to suggest the theory of a spherical Earth? How about his theories of reincarnation? He called it metempsychosis, but the theory states that every soul is immortal and that upon death it enters into a new body. Anaximenes, on the other hand, believed that all matter came from the air itself, that through condensation, air would grow denser, forming clouds, water, earth, and eventually stone, and that through rarefication, air would become less dense and eventually become fire. That's an interesting theory, and I can kind of see where he was going with how condensation works. You know, water molecules form clouds, and those clouds become dense, and it rains, but that's where it falls apart. Once you get to saying that water becomes earth or stone, it's more about chemical compositions and things that they just probably didn't understand in 6 BC. But counter to Pythagoras, Anaximenes developed the first model of the Earth as a flat disk, floating through the air with the sun and stars floating alongside it. Just to give you a little background for how long this little debate has been going on. But back to Anaximander, his theory of the multiverse has been up for debate for at least as long, probably longer considering he was one who taught both of these other guys. Most recently, among the work of Leonardo Taran in the text of Simplicus, he proposed that Aristotle's physics, for which the multiverse is based, is not intended to be a definitive study on this topic. Similarly, Eric Nelson in Chimera of the Cosmos states, the multiverse cosmology exhibits unique epistemic problems because it posits the extents of universes inaccessible from our own. Since empirical investigation is not possible, philosophical investigation takes a prominent role. This inaccessibility of the other universes causes argumentation for the multiverse hypothesis to be wholly dependent upon typicality assumptions that relate to our observed universe to the unobserved universes. The necessary reliance on typicality assumptions results in the multiverse circularity problem. The multiverse hypothesis is justified only through invoking typicality assumptions, but typicality assumptions are justified only through invoking the multiverse hypothesis. The unavoidability of the circularity is established through argumentation for each of the two conjuncts that comprise it. And Andrew Gregory asked in his book, One Cosmos or Many, whether Anaximander had the requisite beliefs to support multiple cosmoi, and argues that the single cosmos is what makes the most logical sense. And lastly, in the Classical Quarterly published by Cambridge University, Radim Kokandrel says that the issue with infinite worlds is closely linked to the nature of Anaximander's scheme of the universe and Ainoan cosmologies in general, and that the matter has bearing on the subject of the duration of perishing of the world. See, Anaximander also thought that the world itself would eventually just dry up, that water was a finite resource, and perhaps this is why he was seeking a new cosmos to go to, in case the first one no longer proved hospitable. And perhaps that was Ultimecia's goal as well. We know that Ultimecia comes from a time where she is hated and ostracized to being a sorceress and seeks reprieve from her eternal torment and loneliness. So whether or not Rinoa is Ultimecia is a matter of who's doing the evaluating. Is it just the devs trolling us? Maybe. Or maybe it's the result of multiple cosmoi within the Final Fantasy universe. There's some evidence to suggest this as well, and it comes in the form of Culex. See, just like the theory stated, Final Fantasy had this habit of throwing in surprise villains at the end of the game. For Final Fantasy VIII, this was Ultimecia herself, and for IX, it was Necro. And to a lesser extent, villains like Zeromus in Final Fantasy IV and Exeth from Final Fantasy V. While the latter two villains have a bit more foreshadowing than the prior, they all seem to work on the same way. A destroyer sent to the dimension to wipe out all life. All existence denied. Culex is a villain in Super Mario RPG produced by Squaresoft that gives merit to a multiple cosmoi within the Final Fantasy franchise, as he mentions going to other Final Fantasy worlds. This suggestion is further backed up by the Dissidia titles. While not considered canon to any of the existing franchises, the Dissidia games pull from the theory of multiple cosmoi, and that is where we see the most similarities between Rinoa and Ultimecia come from. So maybe, in some other cosmoi out there, where all the right or wrong choices were made, Rinoa does become Ultimecia. But for us, the player, we explore the game and the cosmoi where she is not. Art for this week is the return of Didic from Fiverr. They're a professional graphic designer who is also versed in typography and graffiti, cartooning, illustrations, and more. We obviously like their work, so if you liked it too, click the link down in the description to commission them for your own project today.